COVID-19 fatalities could be much higher than official figures suggest. The South African Medical Research Council says there were more than 145,000 excess natural deaths over the past 10 months. They were recorded between May and Feb. The council has not given details on the cause of the deaths, but estimates between 85 and 95% of these are related to COVID-19. Well, 1 year since COVID-19 hit and the fight against the virus continues. South Africa has lost over 50,000 lives, as we just mentioned. The first case reported in KwaZulu Natal. Shortly after that, the virus, of course, spiraling out of control. To reflect on this, Professor Helen Rees from the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority joining us now. Prof, thanks so much for your time. What a year it's been, right? Especially for you as SAHPRA. How has this virus changed your work?
Well, I mean, sort of unrecognizably. And, you know, drug regulatory authorities are often sort of things in the background that you know, very, very important for health systems, but not often talked about. And if they are talked about, most people are not happy with them for one reason or another, because they're a regulator and they impose rules and restrictions. And so they're often not the most popular people. But SAHPRA really, I mean, I chair the board, but I've watched the staff of SAHPRA, the CEO, I've watched my colleagues on the board work. It has had to transform itself. So we suddenly found ourselves dealing with things that were really not previously within our remit. So we found that we were very early on looking at lab diagnostics, and globally there were very few guidelines about how do you evaluate something's a new virus, how do you evaluate whether this lab diagnostic is or isn't going to work. And we had to work with the National Health Laboratory Service to rapidly set up a system that ensured that the diagnostics that we allowed in really worked. And we did actually really well. Unlike in the US, where they licensed hundreds of diagnostics and then had to reverse it, we didn't do that. We were really strict. And so the diagnostics we allowed in for both rapid and for the lab were really good. But, you know, it went beyond that. We had some aspects of PPE that we were responsible for, the hospital end of that, and clinical trials. I mean, suddenly we were having to evaluate clinical trials on a range of both therapeutics and vaccines, all sorts of things that were being proposed for both prevention and treatment. And then, of course, vaccines as well, which, of course, very topical now, and saying how do we rapidly evaluate a vaccine when you've got very little data coming in to begin with, and how do you speed that up? So the entire process and the focus of SAHPRA, like many other institutions, has had to redirect itself to COVID while still doing its day job.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit more about that evaluation process, because just yesterday, Reuters reporting that SAHPRA says it's at an advanced stage of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine review. How do you review a vaccine? Are you getting samples to the lab, or are you using data produced in other countries?
Well, remember that these are brand new vaccines. All of them are brand new vaccines. What's important when we review them is that we have clinical data, that we have laboratory data, and in many cases we also have animal data. So we'll look first at the laboratory data to see what was it that indicated that this could be a successful vaccine, and then we'll look at the construct of that vaccine, because these different vaccines, the Pfizer versus the J&J, are very different constructs. They are made in a different way, and they act in a different way. The end point is hopefully the same, which is to protect you. And then we look at the clinical trial data, which is extremely important. And I think many people have become experts in clinical trials as a result of this. So we look at the early data, which says, is it safe? Is it effective? Can we see an immune response? And what sort of dose looks like it's going to get that immune response and be safe? And then we look at the data when we start to roll out to several hundred people. And we ask the same question. Does it look like it has a good immune response in a bigger group of people? And is it safe? Always very important. And then these great big trials that everyone's heard about, you know, 30,000, 40,000 people, where we look then as, does it work? And the difficulty that we've now got is that the does it work question was done in many settings with the first virus, the Wuhan virus. And now we have a variant. So we're having to talk to all the companies, which we're doing, and saying, do you have any data on your vaccine and how it works against the variant? Have you got anything that can give us a suggestion of that? Do you have clinical data? Don't you? How are we going to get data once we roll this out? How are we going to continue to build up our database of understanding? So all of that has to happen. When we import a vaccine for rollout, we also ensure that the quality of the manufacturing is what it says it is. So we get a lot of data presented to the regulator about the quality of manufacturing. When it comes in, as you heard before, we take samples and it goes to a lab and we check for quality as well.
Yeah. So you've obviously had to adjust the way you do things because this virus has basically changed the way many sectors work. Talk to me then about the decision over ivermectin. SAPRO came under much criticism because you didn't give this drug the green light initially. You then did under strict conditions. Do you think you handled this one properly?
I think there have been many difficult challenges here, and the fact that there are people sitting on both sides of the argument tells you that as a regulator, you've got to really apply your mind, look at the science and the evidence, but try and see what is best for the community and what actually ensures safety, because one of the most important things for the Drug Regulatory Authority is safety. I've literally just jumped onto this call from a WHO call where we were discussing ivermectin, and the situation remains the same. That there's some data that looked initially hopeful in very small studies. A study that's come out just now in the last 24 hours has said, no, this doesn't seem to work against mild infections. There's no evidence in this one study that it does. So you've got this problem of what we call equipoise. You can't say it does work and you can't say it doesn't work. And what you need is more data. But in thinking about this, you've also got to say, well, if people are saying, well, you can't say it doesn't, well, I'll take it. But is it safe? We don't know that. And the products that people are taking are veterinary products. They're illegally imported products that some analysis has shown at least 8 of those products have been contaminated. So what we're trying to do while we wait for better design studies, and one came out now in the last 24 hours that said it didn't work for mild infection, while we're waiting for more data like that so that we can eventually say, does it or doesn't it work, we've said, let's allow some ivermectin that's for human use, not veterinary use, into the country. And then individual doctors can motivate why they want to use it. And they'll have to give a motivation around a particular patient. Yeah. But as we get more data, that situation, as I say, of that seesaw of equipoise, it will change one way or another, and we'll be able to give definitive advice.
Yeah. So, Prof, I'm going to ask this to all of the guests today, and I know it's almost impossible, but try to be impartial on this one. If you had to grade the way in which South Africa has handled this COVID-19 crisis, A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever, where do you think we stand?
A being good and F being bad, hey?
Yeah.
I would probably give us a B-. I think we've done some things incredibly well. I think, first of all, no country's got an A. It's impossible in a pandemic to get an A, because there was no way anyone could have been totally prepared for what's hit us and the changes, the variant that occurred. And then we had a vaccine, and the vaccine might not or might have worked. I mean, all of these things, we're adjusting all the time. It's impossible to get an A. I think we've done some things incredibly well. I think some of the aspects of the lockdown, and we know that some of the things are questionable, but some of them have been really important. And the measures we've taken, the mask wearing, the distancing, the mass gatherings and restrictions on those, the sanitizing, getting shops and workplaces to really have to respect those measures involving the transport industry. Okay, not as well as we might have wanted to do it, but we really have tried to do that well. The second thing is hospital preparation. I mean, I think that the emphasis on oxygen that South Africa took very early on has to be incredibly important. I mean, now some people are saying that, oxygen might indeed save more lives than vaccines in the long run. The oxygen for people who are seriously ill is absolutely critical. And we thought about that, and we did that. I mean, the criticism, as you were saying just now, about could we have ordered the vaccines earlier, we'll go back and we'll all have to look at that and say, could we have done that differently? Yeah. The important thing now is to get those vaccines into the country as quickly as possible and to roll them out as efficiently as possible. So I would say we haven't been perfect. Yep, we've made mistakes, but I think that we've done quite a lot of things well. I would never give any country an A. I would probably give us a B minus.